Hello and welcome to Fiction Fans, a podcast where we read books and other words too. I'm Lily.
And I'm Sarah, and today we are thrilled to be joined by Andrew DeYoung to talk about his apocalyptic novel, The Temps, with us. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. I am going to have to stop myself from jumping right into book talk.
We have a couple of questions to get through before we get to there.
So the very first one is, Andrew, what's something great that happened lately?
Yeah, this was a good question for me to think about. Yesterday, I was privileged to be able to attend a really fun concert.
Ooh.
Not like a rock concert, although, I'd love to get to one of those soon. But I actually went to like a classical music concert that was really fun. A friend of mine, or my brother actually, was performing with a group, playing some Italian Baroque music in a very large cathedral that we have in St. Paul. And it was magical. It was a magical evening. It really felt like I was in medieval times some of the time. Like I kind of closed my eyes and I was like, oh, this feels like the Italian Renaissance. Like I'm in a cathedral in the 1600s or something like that. It was wonderful. So that was something that had a lot of fun recently.
That's amazing.
That sounds incredible.
Wait, what instrument does your brother play?
Well, he was actually a singer.
Oh, but the vocal cord.
Yeah. So he played his voice. That's his instrument. But there were like real, I don't even know the names of them. They were like lutes or something. I don't know.
Oh, that's so cool.
Large guitars, they looked like. So real Renaissance instruments. It was quite a night.
Oh my God. I'm so jealous.
Yeah, it was great.
I'm just guessing, but I think you probably beat both of our good things.
Oh, really? I didn't intend to.
No, that's good. Everyone always has something good to say, and it's so fun to see what people come up with.
That's great.
My good thing is very, very lame compared to that. We ordered Thai food delivery from our favorite Thai restaurant yesterday.
I'm actually jealous. So yeah, that's not bad at all.
And I am looking forward to leftovers because whenever we get delivery, we order like way too much food.
Well, as you should.
Yeah. So now I get to eat Thai food for like 3 days.
There's no other way to do it, really. So, I mean, you did it right.
Thank you.
My good thing, well, today was a little shitty, so it's a good day to be talking about bad corporate practices in fiction. But I did manage to clear out the last 2 cardboard boxes in my box room, which is otherwise known as my spare bedroom. So it looks more like an inhabitable room than I'm trying to make a box jungle.
I'd clap, but I don't want to spill wine everywhere. Imagine I'm clapping.
Well, the room that you're in looks very nice.
Thank you.
Very habitable.
Yes, because she hides everything.
Yeah, the living room was I had made a point of making it nice from the start. But in order to do that, I just threw everything into the box room. And so the box room has been a disaster for the last 2.5 years.
See, I podcast from my box room with a very strategic angle on the camera so no one can see.
Yeah, well done.
Well, as I guess not even implied, outright stated a moment ago, I'm drinking wine this evening. I also had a weird day at work. You're going to get a weird energy from us, Andrew. I'm sorry in advance. But my glass of extremely cheap boxed wine and a wonderful book conversation, it's going to make the evening wonderful.
Sounds perfect.
What's everyone else drinking tonight?
I'm also drinking wine because, as I said, work was, well, it's a good evening to be drinking wine and talking about books. I'll just put it that way.
Well, if you both had a weird day at work, I mean, this is a book about weird days at work.
Yeah, it's really perfect. Yeah,
it is.
Perfect. I did not have wine in the house, which I'm a little bit disappointed about. So I looked in the liquor cabinet. And I actually poured myself a little bit of. This is called. Oh, this is a theme. This is Fernet Branca, which is an Italian, somewhat bitter but a little bit sweet liqueur. So I guess the theme is Italian because I went to like an Italian Renaissance concert and now I've got an Italian liquor, just like a little bit of it to keep going through the end of the evening.
That's a good theme to have.
It is, yeah.
Well, this is actually a book podcast. So other than the title that we'll be discussing today. Has anyone read anything good lately?
I read The Kaiju Preservation Society by John Scalzi, which is a science fiction novel. It's basically a Godzilla movie in book form. He wrote it as like a pandemic project to keep his mind off of things. So it's very much popcorn reading, but very fun. You know, it's very satisfying in that there are lots of big kaiju. The bad guys, you know, get their comeuppance at the end.
Those are always nice.
It was great.
Good things. I've heard good things about that one.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it.
You might have some kaiju over there right now. I just heard dog sound.
Yes, the secret fourth guest on the podcast this evening.
Well, I just finished a book called In a Lonely Place, which is a somewhat older book. I think it was published maybe in the 40s or the 50s. A crime novel that was later made into a decently well-known movie starring Humphrey Bogart. And that was really good. Kind of creepy in the way of, 50s LA crime fiction. It sits on the shelf pretty well with like Raymond Chandler and stuff like that. And then recently, just a couple days ago, I jumped Sea of Tranquility, Emily St. John Mandel's new book, which I'm very excited about. I've only just dipped in, but I just love her writing. And so this is one of my most anticipated books of the year. So really excited to dig into that one.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I've not read anything of hers, but I've heard really good things about Sea of Tranquility. So
yeah, me too. So a lot of people are telling me that it's going to be great.
There's nothing better than being excited to start a book. It's the best
real.
feeling.
Yeah.
I actually have read something. Usually my answer is no, because I'm busy editing the podcast. But I read a nonfiction book on backyard winemaking because we've been sort of dipping our toes into that. We probably should have read a book on it before we started, but we've been doing okay so far.
I mean, better late than never.
In a future podcast, hopefully you'll be drinking some backyard wine.
Yes, I have before. We just don't have any at the moment. We have an apple wine batch that's sort of almost done.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah,
hopefully.
You've inspired me. I'm going to try making lemon wine.
Ooh, that sounds so weird. It's so exciting.
It sounds really weird. I have no idea how it's going to come out. Apparently it's a thing you can do. I have a lot of lemons. I have 2 very prolific lemon trees that are basically full of lemons, like 24/7, 365.
California problems.
Hashtag California problems. So I'm desperately trying to figure out what to do with them because there's too many left. Like I give some away, but even then there's too many that like I can't use them all up. So hopefully this lemon wine will be a success and I'll have something to do with all of my lemons.
Look forward to hearing about that.
I get to reap the rewards, so I also hope so.
Yes.
Well, on to the topic of the day. I finished the book earlier today, so I'm still like on the come down from it. So excuse my jitters. Your book, The Temps, is about a group of temps. I'm sure no one could guess that. Who are surviving a post-apocalyptic scenario. I'm not going to get too into it right now, but obviously our first question has to be, show of hands, who here has temped?
Yeah.
I'm the odd man out.
That's all right. I just wanted to get it. Like, there were so many extremely familiar moments, not the zombie apocalypse part, thankfully, but the extremely overwhelmed temp in a corporate office, fairly fresh out of college. So familiar. And it hurt in a good way.
I like that. I wrote it certainly out of my own experience, and which kind of didn't feel good at the time, being really educated and spending all this money on having spent all this money on college and then like, oh, I'm just working a temp job. This is depressing. So, I mean, that was the original kernel of the book. The sort of apocalypse stuff came later. Yeah. Anyway.
No, please wait. So was this just like a slice of life temp?
Well,
and then you're like, what if we threw in an apocalypse?
I wanted to write about that time of my life, which, it was like my 20s, basically my early to mid 20s, which was a time of my life where I didn't really know what I was doing. I had maybe, we call it like a quarter life crisis. I didn't know what I was doing or what I wanted to be. And a lot of that had to do with work. you want to get a job. I wanted to get a job, and I wanted to get a job that felt good to go to and that felt fulfilling. So that was the heart of it. But then, the apocalypse piece, I think part of this existential crisis that I had, it felt apocalyptic. I don't know. I was just very attuned in this time of my life, and still, but like, especially back then, I was just very attuned to everything that was wrong with the world, because I felt that there was a lot that was wrong with my own life, because I just couldn't find anything that felt fulfilling. And I noticed all the things that were wrong with the world, and it felt like the world was ending. So when I sort of looked back, I had the idea at the time, like, I should write about this someday, but I didn't really know what a story would be, because, I just thought that story about an English major who was having trouble finding a job and was really disillusioned with the world would be kind of boring. And that was just like my story. So I didn't write about it, and I didn't write about it. And then eventually, I got into my 30s, which is where I am now, in my late 30s, in fact. And I thought I should really write about it, that time of my life, because I always thought that it would be so interesting. And, if I don't do it soon, I'm just going to forget what it was like. So I was looking back, and I was remembering all my concerns about work and wanting to find fulfilling work, but also remembering my sort of feelings of apocalyptic disillusionment, feeling like the world was about to end. And I thought, oh, what would happen if you put these two things together? And I sort of played with that. I thought, okay, temp workers, young temp workers, disillusioned, not really enjoying their work, who are stuck in the office during an apocalypse. And it sounded like I could put a lot of my feelings from that time into that story. It would be interesting. And it also struck me as a little bit funny as a premise. So I just started writing into it. The whole thing started.
I think for me, reading it in the middle or tail end, wherever you put us right now.
End, definitely the end.
Fingers crossed.
of a pandemic. It definitely hits a little, the apocalypse, not that the apocalypse in the Temps is necessarily a pandemic,
right,
but it definitely hits a little differently. The Temps have to isolate themselves in the building, and they can't go out and things like that.
Being afraid of the air.
Yeah. How much of the writing process overlapped with the pandemic, if any?
It's funny you ask. I actually started writing this in 2017, and I finished it in probably early 2018.
So you were just very prescient then.
I guess, yeah. And, my early readers, once the pandemic started, they said, oh man, this is really a resonant novel now, isn't it? And I was like, I don't know. I couldn't tell, honestly. But now that, it's come out and I've had to read it a couple times on its way to publication, because that's just something you have to do in the publishing process. I really do think that, I don't know, prescient, but certainly we're thinking a lot right now about work in a really funny way. And in this book, they're stuck at work. Work becomes their home because they can't leave the office. For a lot of people, people who were maybe privileged enough to have the kind of job that they could do from home, that's not everybody, but it was kind of the opposite, but still resonates in that way, that work came into their homes. And so like the home became the office, and you couldn't leave. Like we couldn't leave our homes, which were also our offices. And it just felt like working through the end of the world sometimes. And this is a book about that. And yes, being afraid of the air, not being able to go outside. There's a lot of really weird coincidences. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe I should try to be a psychic or something like that.
I hope that's where the similarities stop.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Something that jumped out to us was how your book sort of speaks to this modern struggle, maybe not modern, but currently relevant struggle. So of people trying to reconcile their career with their identity. And you sort of already covered that, but I think that really was part of what made it feel so realistic in a way that you hope zombie books are not.
Hope that didn't make it scarier. But yeah, it's one of the major problems, I think, of life today, or maybe it's been a problem for a long time, and I'm just only attuned to it because, I'm living right now. But we do have this idea of self-actualization, which is that it's possible for a person to follow their dreams to have a livelihood that pays them enough to live and eat, but also like is an extension of who they are. But the reality is that the economy, the 21st century economy doesn't actually yield up many jobs like that. There are fulfilling jobs out there, but there's also a lot of soul crushing jobs. And even the jobs that are like passion based, they'll wear you down too. So it was really, I said that, it was me thinking back to my 20s, which is when a lot of these thoughts started happening. But I think it was also me kind of like working through just being an adult who's now a little ways into my career and realizing that, work is always hard. And a lot of the time I'd rather be doing something else. I hope my boss isn't listening, but, it's just the modern predicament of like, you need to do this stuff to live, but fulfillment usually often comes elsewhere. But those of us who can find some fulfillment in work, that's a very lucky thing.
And I think for me, I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I've, startups, Silicon Valley, whatever. And so this felt very familiar because I've worked at places that have that kind of culture where you kind of get subsumed into it, and your self-worth gets tied into the perks and the foosball table and the free, the free beer or whatever. And I don't have a question. I'm not going anywhere with a question, but
I've worked one of those jobs as well. I mean, I don't live in the Bay Area. So like, there's definitely startups here in the Twin Cities area where I live, but it's just not the same. But, I worked there was a ping pong table and there were like vintage pinball machines, and there was free beer that you could technically drink whenever, but it was kind of an unspoken rule that you had to wait till 4:30, weird things. But everybody worked really hard and was super stressed out and kind of like addicted to that adrenaline also, and really enjoying the perks. So it was like, yeah, hustle culture, you're hustling, you're a rock star, you're overworked, and probably not happy if you're really
probably underpaid.
But like, we have free beer for you. There's free beer. It's so fun. It's so hip. It's everywhere. It's everywhere, that culture.
There's I think it's Dominic, one of the, I'll say one of the main temps that we follow. There's four. Jacob, I'd say, is probably is the first point of view who we follow the most throughout the book. And Dominic is the one who's going to business school and has been applying at the main company where this takes place. And he starts listing at one point some of the jobs he's applied for. And the names are so ridiculous, but also 100% genuine.
Research ninja, like some kind of alchemist. I don't know, business alchemist.
There's a wizard in there.
There's a wizard. Yeah, I just wanted to come up with the most ridiculous things I could think of. But it's real, actually. Like, I thought of ridiculous things, but then once you start digging around, I see this stuff on like Instagram and TikTok sometimes. There's accounts that just kind of make fun of corporate culture, and they do talk about this. Like, we want a rock star ninja, yada, yada. It's like, oh my goodness.
I mean, the startup that I worked for definitely had rock star and ninja in their job postings. So,
well, you must have been a rock star ninja if you worked there. So
I don't know about that, but I got free beer.
I did too. I didn't last there very long. It was like a hip ad and digital agency, but it also, a lot of the clients that we had were large corporations in the Twin Cities area that had huge corporate campuses. So I went to, like, on client visits, I went to Best Buy corporate. I went to Target corporate. There's a few others, but like the Best Buy campus, that was the first time I'd ever stepped into a corporate campus where it was one huge long building that had like 10,000 people in it. And I was like, this is wild. And so, that job, that sort of startup job, it was a small company, but it put me in touch with companies very much like the one that I write about in the book. And I was just kind of fascinated because it was a self-contained ecosystem,
Mm-hmm.
It was like a mall or a airport concourse. You really could stay there probably for days on end without having to leave and survive. It's a very strange thing. I'm a person who, has anxieties sometimes about corporate culture and capitalism, but also I participate in it, and I engage in the jargon of value creation and optimization and this and that and the other thing. So I play those games, and I actually enjoy them to a certain extent, even as I kind of roll my eyes at myself.
So how much do you plan when you write? You mentioned that you were working on this for a couple of years. How much of this sort of came to you as you wrote it, and how much was this mapped out?
That's a great question. I had the premise. So that came to me first, the premise. And then I wrote a character, and that was Jacob. And at this point, I only had like a vague notion of what would happen. But I wrote Jacob. I wrote the Jacob chapter. And then I just started, initially I was just kind of feeling my way through. And it wasn't very planful. I think I basically wrote the first 4 characters, and it was feeling really good. And then I thought, okay, I got to slow down, and I have to actually make some plans. And I found that I had put some things in like this. So, I started essentially not free associating exactly, but I was just playing around. I was flying by the seat of my pants. But then in making the plan, I kind of had to take some of the things that I'd put in. Like there are already details about the company, about the apocalypse that happens. I had to take those things and either change them to fit what my plan was, or just kind of like take them and maybe turn them into the plan, like treat them as clues to what my plan should be. So, I got maybe 10% of the way into the book and was feeling good. And then I made a sort of an outline, not a strict outline. I call it, it's kind of like a punch list. What I do is I'll do a punch list of things that I think need to happen, scenes I want to write, or like story events that need to take place to get me to the end. But I will say, and you mentioned that you might have a sort of spoiler section. Right up until the end, I thought that there were probably 2 or 3 possibilities for how it was going to end. And I was torn right up to the very last scene.
Well,
I'm writing that down.
we will have a follow-up question about that in the spoiler section.
Yeah.
All caps, lots of question marks. Okay.
Yeah. Yes. So you've talked a little bit about how your life experiences and work experiences inspired some of the events of the novel, or kind of the genesis of the novel. But was there any work or book that was particularly inspirational for you as well in writing this?
Yeah. So I thought a little bit about, there are some zombie apocalypse, mostly movies, that informed me. So
we that was a leading question.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, so you may have seen Dawn of the Dead. There are 2 versions that I'm aware of. There's like a 70s version, George Romero, and then Zack Snyder directed a version. And that was basically a zombie apocalypse, and the survivors are trapped in a mall. And I always thought that was really interesting, partly because I thought it would be kind of fun to be trapped in a mall, like be the only person in a mall, and like all the stuff is yours, but also it's threatening outside. So like, it's just a cool premise. And when I came up with this, I was like, oh, it's like Dawn of the Dead, but with an office instead of a mall. And that sort of self-contained indoor environment was similar because, malls are interesting too. They're just like buildings that are whole worlds, So, Dawn of the Dead was definitely one. 28 Days Later is a zombie movie that I like a lot, although I haven't seen it in a while, so I'm not sure how it holds up. But at one point in my life, I really did like it.
It's still very good. Don't worry.
It's still very good. It holds
Yes.
up. That's good. And then an office novel, pretty funny one, I think, called Then We Came to the End, which is a book by Joshua Ferris. And that is actually about some employees at an ad agency who, like, the agency's business starts to go down, and they start to get laid off. And it's kind of, I don't know, it's just a really interesting book about office culture. It's interesting and funny. And Ferris does this really interesting thing he will write from the perspective of individual employees of the company, but every once in a while, he'll write from the perspective of all of them at the same time. And he uses something that writers don't use very often, which is the narrative first person plural. So it's like narrated by we, and we are the employees. And I just think that that's fascinating. I don't do that in this book, but there is sort of a break that happens in the middle where I go away from my characters and I just kind of speak for the collective. So that was an influence as well.
And your interlude is suddenly present tense, right? I believe most of the book is past tense. I really liked that.
It's all past tense, but then the interlude goes present tense and is really more omniscient than embedded in any particular character's perspective.
Well, you hit the two I was thinking of.
Yeah.
I think the two images that really stuck out to me is particularly in Dawn of the Dead, when you see the zombies who begin sort of rehashing their habits from life, pushing shopping carts and things. And I don't think it's a spoiler to say that there are some temps who continue working throughout the apocalypse like nothing has changed. And so that really reminded me of that. And then, of course, with 28 Days, it's a rage virus, technically. They're not undead, which is sort of what it is in your book. It's airborne.
It's airborne. It's not a virus, but it is more. It is quite comparable, really, to 28 Days Later.
And they call them the Furies, which I really loved.
Yeah, some Greek mythology shout outs in this book, and the Furies is one of them. One of my characters is a classics major because I wanted to think of something that was even more impractical than my English degree, I guess. I don't know.
That actually ties in very nicely with this next question that we have. And as an aside, I really enjoyed that she was a classics major. I considered majoring in classics at university.
Fun.
I ultimately didn't because it was a little too impractical. Not that my degree is any more practical, but classics was a little more impractical than I was willing to go.
I only minored in it. That's okay, right?
That's amazing. I love that.
but I loved all of the references to classics in this book. And so the question that we had was, how much of that is like personal passion, and how much of that did you research for the book was driven by the needs of the book?
Well, I do like Greek myth and like myth broadly. I studied a little bit of Latin in college. I never studied Greek, but I did study Latin. So I mean, I think that that's pretty core to classics majors. One thing that did happen, and this was accidental, but I kind of backed into it and then into the classics thing, and then really was happy about it. And that was in naming the company. I think I could mention that. That's not a spoiler. That's
not a spoiler.
It's right in the first line. It's called Delphi Enterprises. And Delphi, of course, the Oracle at Delphi, this is a part of Greek history and mythology. But it really only happened because I was trying to come up with a name for the company. And I was really attached to the idea that it would be a company whose business was a little bit hazy, because I feel like there's a lot of businesses out there in the world. I really wanted to connect to the notion of like, you're young and you don't understand how the world works, even though I feel like I still don't understand how the world works. Like, I don't understand how a lot of companies make their money. And I was trying to think of a company that I know, like I know their brand, but I don't know what they do. And I thought about Oracle, because I know Oracle is a company, but I don't really understand their business. But then I couldn't call it Oracle. It's like, okay, Oracle, Delphi. And then suddenly I was, creating details of the company that tied off with Greek myth. And then, I had this character, Lauren, and I wanted to talk about apocalypse. I wanted to tease out the meaning of apocalypse, because I have this whole thing about like, in the apocalypse to us means the end of the world. But the original meaning of the word is about an unveiling. It's sort of a revelation, which I think is interesting. But, that's a Greek, it comes from the Greek roots. So it made sense to have it explained by someone who understood Greek. And so I had it kind of come from the mind of a classics major. And from that point, I had Delphi and I had a classics major. And I was like, I just have to lean into this because it's fun. So, but then I don't know, maybe the classics minor can tell me, I had to do some research to make sure that I got everything right, and I'm still not sure if I did. There may be some things that I got wrong, but I did my best, I'd say, just to not expose my ignorance, because I like classics and Greek myth and stuff like that, but I don't know all of it. And there are some people who do. There are some books that are mentioned. The character Lauren, who's the classics major, she grew up loving Delaire's of Greek myths, which I love.
Which I have to say, I love that call out because I read that as a child.
Yeah.
Like it has a pride of place on my bookshelf.
Well, and I don't love it as much, but I think I did kind of skim through Edith Hamilton's mythology. Mm-hmm. And I'm not actually a person who's head over heels for Joseph Campbell, but like I've read enough of Hero of a Thousand Faces to know that that's another one. So, I kind of layered that stuff in for folks who like that.
It worked very well for me.
Good. I'm glad.
There were some extremely, I want to call them sweet, but I think introspective is probably the better word. Mm-hmm. Introspective moments where our main characters think about their lives before the event and sort of that consideration and thoughtfulness. And it reminds me of a tirade I've gone on in the past that I'll spare you about how the best thing about zombie stories is not the zombies, it's how the author uses zombies to look at current modern culture. And I think that was another aspect of this sort of identity and career, the zombies having them stuck in the office building and thinking about how they've gotten to this point, mm-hmm. which is something I think probably everyone has done, although maybe with a less dramatic inciting incident. Yeah.
I mean, the thing that interests me the most about apocalyptic fiction is not necessarily, I mean, obviously there tends to be a lot of details about, where do we get food and where do we get water, and someone has a infection and we need to get antibiotics and stuff like that. The survivalist element. But the thing that has always interested me is just the feeling of living through hard times and what that does to a person. Because I feel like we all kind of live through apocalypses in our lives. It's not the end of the world. It's just like big stuff that happens and the world that was before ends and a new world begins. And we're living through that stuff all the time. I heard someone recently say, this was when Russia invaded Ukraine. They said, the world that we woke up to is not the same as the world of yesterday. I was like, oh, they're talking about an apocalypse. Like the world ended and a new one began. And this happens to us all the time. And what's that like to live through? And how do you reconcile the big stuff that happens in the world, the big scary stuff, and your own little life and your dreams of fulfillment and contentment? I don't know the answer to that, but those are the questions that really interest me. Like, oh my gosh, there's a zombie apocalypse outside, but I still can't let go of my dream of just having a job that feels okay or whatever, Mm-hmm. It's hard to let go of those things, even when big stuff like pandemics and war are happening right outside the window.
Absolutely. We have one more comment before we wrap up the non-spoiler section. This is more of a comment than a question, but we both really appreciated the snide commentary about corporations loving to define and describe millennials.
Oh, yes.
And how weird it is sitting through that.
And how we've killed, X industry or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a millennial. I think I'm an elder millennial. At one point, someone called us geriatric millennials, but I don't acknowledge that. But it's just been fascinating seeing corporations kind of wring their hands about us. A lot of that hand wringing seems to be moving on to Gen Z, although sometimes they still say millennials as though they don't know that, and maybe they don't realize that we're like old now. We're getting old. It's like, I'm a millennial. I'm almost 40, I'm pushing 40, but millennial just seems to be shorthand for, I don't know.
Kids these days.
Yeah. Kids these days. But I did very much intend this book in some ways as a millennial statement, or at least my millennial statement, a statement from this millennial about how it sure feels like we inherited a world that older generations kind of ruined. And now it's ours to kind of pick up the pieces. And now it's Gen Z's to pick up the pieces. This is always what happens, is that the older generations ruin things and they say, oh, here you go. And then we're left to be like, all right, what do we do?
My favorite, why aren't you thriving?
Yeah, why aren't you thriving? You're just in tons of debt from school and, you know, we're not.
But it's all that avocado toast you're buying and eating.
Exactly.
But you should still be buying diamonds. What's wrong with you? Yeah.
And houses, like, yeah, you know, get your nest egg.
So our last question is not actually for you before we move on to the spoiler section, but it is, why should you read this book? Sarah, would you like to start?
Yes. If you want post-apocalyptic fiction with really insightful commentary on what it means to work in an office and how that intersects with our views of ourselves, our portrayals of ourselves. If you like zombie films, but wish that the zombie film focused a little less on the zombies and a little more on the survivors and how they were feeling, then I think you should read The Temps.
If you have ever had a crappy office job in your life, you should read this book.
Yes. If you've worked in any kind of like tech startup or any kind of tech company and you just want to see them lambasted, like, yeah, you should read this book.
Or even data entry. That was my temp job. I was the data entry person.
Or data entry.
So you should read this book.
Yeah, but I was like, you know, I've worked at Delphi. Maybe not Delphi, but I've worked there. This is very familiar.
That's lovely to hear. Thank you for those.
To avoid spoilers, skip to 1:11:43. Okay, I know we said we made a note about something we have to cover in the spoiler section, but first, I do have an all caps thing I need to shout at you from far away from the microphone, so I don't actually.
Okay, but this was our note that we made to ask about.
Turn down my volume.
No, mine is you killed Jacob. Oh.
Yeah.
I was so surprised by that. I was like, he's not necessarily the main character, but he was the first point of view character that we were introduced to. He's not going to die.
And he was me. You killed me.
I think I may have killed off like a version of myself too, honestly. I mean, yeah, I did. And that feels bad. A lot of people have talked to me about that. Actually, some people, like, you know, friends will read the book and they'll send me like a tearful emoji when they get to that part. I mean, I thought a little bit, maybe this is a spoiler section for Game of Thrones too, but I thought about Game of Thrones and Ned Stark. I mean, I think that's thoroughly spoiled in the culture by now. Mm-hmm. I thought about Ned Stark and the thing that George R. R. Martin does of kind of setting you up to think like, well, the main character doesn't die. The main hero doesn't die. And then he kills the main hero. And then he like sets up another main hero and then kills that guy too. So, you know, he's very much set up. There's sort of a notion that we have and that I have as a reader that there is sort of like magical protection around main characters.
Plot armor.
Yeah. And I just wanted to make sure that everything that was happening here had some natural consequences. And Jacob was getting too deep. He's kind of like, I mean, this is the spoiler section, right? He's getting deep into the secrets of the company. And I knew, because I knew how the book was going to end, I knew that someone was around to want to stop him and that they would. And I think the other thing is that Jacob is, I mean, you say that he's you, which I'm flattered by. Like, I love people seeing themselves in books. I love seeing myself in books. It's always such an interesting experience. He's also me. He wrote, this is in the first chapter. He wrote like a thesis in college. The title is the title of my master's, or it's the topic at least of my master's thesis in English literature, which I got about Victorian detective fiction. I just like put it in there. as a sort of Easter egg for my friends. But like, he's me. And because he's me, I do have some sympathy for him, some tenderness toward him. I'm also annoyed with him because he's like an amped up version of me. So self-pitying, which I was, kind of entitled, which I was, and maybe there's something psychological going on there with my killing him off, that I was like, that guy was me. I just need to put him away. I just need to put him away and let these other characters, who I also love, kind of take over and be the heroes.
I thought all 4 characters had a really good balance of being deeply flawed people, but in such human ways that you forgive them for it.
Yeah.
Maybe I was reading too fast, but I don't think I knew that he had gotten killed when we see him. I was like, maybe it was a taser. I might have been speed reading, though. That might be my fault.
I tried to make it ambiguous.
Okay,
yeah,
so that wasn't me. Okay.
It was definitely ambiguous. I mean, and I think that because there's that moment at the end where Brant says, no, he's actually alive. Like, he's not dead. This was just playing with you, which I really love because it hit my expectation as a reader and desire as a reader for this to all have been some kind of really weird, really fucked up, like power play on Brant's part.
But at the same time, reading that section, I was like, this can't all have been a simulation. Like, that would be so lame. So when you find out he really is dead, it's almost a relief. Like, it makes the stakes worth it. So it felt good in a really horrible way.
Yeah, I didn't want it all to be a dream,
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a tough one. I mean, I feel bad about killing off Jacob. I'm also surprised that people so far are as sad about that as they are, and maybe it's because he was me, where I was like, people are going to be so annoyed with Jacob. But like, they're annoyed with him and they like him, which, I don't know, does my heart good, because adding flaws to people, maybe that just makes them more relatable.
I mean, I could sit here and criticize him as a person all day, but at the same time, like, everyone has those things, right? So it's not, he didn't have anything unforgivable about him.
Yeah, like I think, yes, he had flaws, but he was also relatable. I mean, as we've said, all of the main point of view characters are incredibly relatable in very many respects.
One thing about Jacob that I think about now is that he's paranoid, right? He's paranoid about the company and about the world, and he turns out to be right, but he's right and also annoying. Like, and that was something that's very important to me, because it's a realization I had sort of coming out of my 20s and maturing a little bit, is that you can be right about the world, but like, you can also be annoying at the same time. Like, I don't know. Being right doesn't necessarily make you virtuous.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I don't know if that does anything for you, but.
Oh, I think Swati has a line similar to that. When she's considering where he's gone, she's thinking to herself, he's investigating this thing, but who cares?
Who cares? Yeah. And obviously, like, it matters, but it's not healthy. It's not healthy for him. His paranoia is rooted in stuff that's real, but it's not a healthy way of being in the world. And that's such a tough thing, because there's so much in the real world to be paranoid and angry about, but you have to find a way to be angry, but also to be healthy. It's another just tough thing that is really hard to navigate in the world.
Useful anger. Is there such
useful
a thing?
anger. Can you harness it, but can you also be happy as a person at the same time? It's an almost impossible question that I think people who want to be conscious of the problems in the world and connected to solutions struggle with all the time.
Okay, thank you for indulging me. Now our real, also all caps, multiple question mark question for the spoiler section.
So you mentioned that you had 3 alternate endings for this book. Can you tell us a little bit about them?
So, and I just threw that number out there. I just had some variations of, like, there were some questions about what was going to happen. And I will say that I really wanted Brant as the villain, to be punished. I went in wanting him to be punished, and I thought about, ways for that to happen. And one of the things I thought was that one of the temps might put everything together and kill him. But then I walked up to it and I thought, these people who I've, created in my head and, sort of developed relationships with, I don't think they're cold-blooded killers. I don't think that any of them, it didn't feel true to any of them that they would just stand there and kill him, much as he might deserve it. That's kind of the sad thing, that like they're good people and like they just don't want to kill even someone who is as bad as he turns out to be. So then the other thing, I was like, well, maybe he's so depressed that he, they're in a tall building at that point. Like maybe he just walks outside and like the gas gets him, or he throws himself from the balcony, or, there's sort of like a end of Lord of the Flies moment where, the helicopter comes down. I think at the end of Lord of the Flies, like the adults come or something like that. There's an outside presence that comes back. I thought, well, maybe they'll bring justice. Maybe they know. And that would have been the more, hopeful ending. Like he dies or he is brought to justice. And maybe I was just in a dark place when I was coming to the end. But I was thinking about the people who were messing up the world when I was in my 20s, and also the people who were messing up the world when I was writing the book. A little political maybe, but like in my 20s,
a safe space. It's okay.
Okay. In my 20s, it was George Bush and like Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld, and the war in Iraq. And like they were torturing people, like it was a bad time. Like America was not doing good stuff. Donald Rumsfeld died peacefully with, he was never prosecuted for anything. Dick Cheney, Bush still, like there's been no consequences really. I'm not convinced that there will be any consequences for Donald Trump, who was the big bad and maybe still is the big bad, was the big bad when I was writing. So I was like, I don't know if it feels like a cop-out to say that the bad, powerful white man will actually be punished, because it just doesn't happen very often. That's depressing. But that's what I ended up with. And what it ended up being is kind of a meditation on like, how do you make your peace with that? You're a young person coming up in the world. And the horrible thing is that you become, not the horrible thing, it's just like what happens. You become kind of co-opted into the system that you hated when you were outside it. And now suddenly you have to work within it and remember all the things, all your sort of revolutionary zeal, but while being co-opted at the same time, and kind of like come to some sort of peace with all the ways that the world is terrible. And so it's like a very ambiguous and tension-filled ending, I think, that to me maybe just speaks to where I am now in adulthood, where I realize like there's a lot of things that need to be fixed about the world. And I've lost a lot of that revolutionary zeal to really change things. Am I becoming part of the problem? So it's like a big question that ends things.
But I think that that's why the ending has such an impact, is because there's not that neat resolution that, as a reader you want, but as a human being living in this world, you're like, but that's completely, not what would happen if there was that kind of neat tying of threads and everything.
I think it's so interesting that you think Brandt being killed by the military would be the more optimistic ending, because to me, that means nothing would change. Then the military takes over and whatever. Like that's still the status quo, just with a different cherry on top.
Well, I wasn't sure about killed necessarily, or like if there would be some punishment, or we're taking you to the International Crimes Against Humanity Court, like whatever's in The Hague, But even that, there's a lot of terrible people who never get prosecuted for war crimes, who committed war crimes. It's a rough ending in a lot of ways. It's hopeful.
Yeah.
I don't know. The thing that really comes to me is that whatever happens, these characters, the ones who remain, they do have a seat at the table. They've kind of bargained their way to a seat at the table and some sort of formation of the world that is to come. And they've come through it with some sort of, there's a bit of ethical compromise because they have to give up the notion of being punished in any way or even any recognition of the terrible things that have happened, but they're there. And that to me is the hopeful piece that the younger generations, the millennials, Gen Z, that we start to take over, and we just have to remember, somehow we have to remember the world that we wanted to create and kind of live into all the big changes that are happening and see what they're telling us about climate change and capitalism and the world that we need to make for ourselves.
Do you ever see yourself writing a sequel or a follow-up to this?
I've thought about it. What's so interesting to me about the current book, or at least what drew me in initially, was the Office, reflecting on The Office. I haven't found my way into the sequel yet, but I do think that it's possible that they're remaking the world, but what has been created is just essentially another Office, only now they're not temps, they're like middle management or something like that, and that's a slightly more adult book, because you're a temp or you're an intern and then you work your way up and then suddenly you're middle management. That's another interesting place to be. I don't know if you've ever been like managers where you are, probably like on some level. Mm-hmm. There's a whole different level of compromise that happens and like power dynamics that are strange.
Yeah.
And that still have implications for who do I want to be? How is my presence on this world making the world a better place? So I do think that there's maybe some potential for a sequel. I just need something to kind of like light me up with it. But I'd love to come back to it, honestly.
I think the realist nugget at the ending makes it more optimistic because it makes it not a fairy tale.
That's good.
Yeah, so I really liked it. It's tempered, but I didn't think it was a sad ending. It was just bittersweet.
So a writer acquaintance of mine, Monica Byrne, she wrote a novel recently called The Actual Star. And her book is set across 3 timelines. And the latter timeline is basically a future utopia that's about 1,000 years from now. But it is implied that between the 2000s and, the 3000s, which is when the utopia is, there's a whole bunch of really cataclysmic events that take place. And that ends up being really optimistic. Humanity, this is sort of the prediction of the book, humanity will navigate its way through a series of sort of apocalyptic, scary events and come out on the other side much wiser. I think that's the hope. It doesn't seem realistic to me that big, scary stuff is just going to stop happening because that's just doesn't seem to be the world that we live in. But it does seem hopeful to think that we have the capability as a civilization to get through it together and come out on the other side a little bit wiser. So I guess that is the optimism, the hope for optimism that is at the end of this book.
Yeah, through the power of love and friendship, humanity will prevail.
We can do it.
Yeah, we can do it. We should still try to prevent,
yes,
disaster.
Please. We should not. If it's avoidable, let's do it.
Changing the topic back a little bit more to the process of writing the book. Were there any moments or scenes that surprised you?
Yeah, there's a scene. Well, this is actually a scene that surprised me and also that I had great difficulty with. And that is the PowerPoint scene. So there's like all the temps come together. There's 4 main temps in the book, but there's actually like a few hundred, and they all find each other. And, they sort of develop a little power structure. And they kind of, they have to talk about like, okay, what are we going to do next? And the sort of self-appointed leader, he just chose himself as leader. He pulls together a PowerPoint to sort of explain, here's what we're going to do. And, it's a PowerPoint. And I struggled with that because I really wanted it to be just like really, I had high expectations for myself, like really great corporate satire here. And I struggled with it. Just like representing the PowerPoint And I thought I botched it, actually. I thought I really messed up the scene. But then a lot of people have been telling me, like, Andrew, the PowerPoint scene. Oh, I love it. So that has surprised me. Sometimes you're doing okay and you don't even realize.
Yeah, I thought that scene was just superb.
One that did surprise me, in the writing, is Lauren and Swati. They are looking for supplies. They have sort of a vulnerable moment that sort of kicks off their friendship. You know, there's some tears. There's quite a bit of vulnerability, and sort of binds them together in thinking about how they want the world to be. And they actually kind of like find a sort of like revolutionary feminism together of like
mandatory yoga pants.
Mandatory yoga pants. Yeah. Mandatory yoga pants for everybody. It's comfortable.
Yes.
Like, men start wars because their clothes are uncomfortable, you know? And it took me by surprise, and I love it because honestly, their relationship in some ways feels like something outside of me. It just feels very organic to the book. And I love it. I love those two.
I felt like all of the relationships in this book felt really genuine. When Jacob and Swati first have a sort of romantic moment, I had to stop and think like, okay, how do I feel about this? Right? Because the hero always hooks up with someone. And I was like, is that what's going on here? But I actually felt like it was developed, you know, after they first get together, but the development is so natural. Maybe not natural because they're in this high stress environment, but it feels extremely sincere in a way that I ended up really liking it, despite, you know, is this just the hero getting the girl being my first instinct? But that was not at all how it ended up feeling. And then especially when Swati tries to find Jacob at the end, it was heartbreaking.
Yeah, I wanted to stay away from that hero gets the girl feeling. Mm-hmm. And I always struggle with a little bit with romance. And I think that probably it's going to vary from reader to reader, whether that's going to be believable or not. But one thing that maybe surprised me there too is that, you know, Swati is the one who makes the first move. And she actually does it, if you read closely, she actually does it in part because she's kind of mad at Jacob. She like wants him to shut up. So she kind of kisses him so that he'll shut up and like let her go to sleep. Because he keeps talking, you know, he's annoying. He can't let go of things. And so she's like, I just need to shut this guy up. And that ended up being something that did feel really real to me, that like there is tenderness in their relationship. But there's also just like a slight undercurrent of like mutual, or maybe not mutual, but at least on Swati's side, annoyance, like, I can't believe I like you. You know, can't you just be a little different? I like you, but like, can you just chill out? I don't know. That was something that I liked and that I kind of discovered in the writing.
The thing that I liked about their relationship was that while I don't think that I would have believed their relationship had it not been forced by these outside events, I mean, forced, right. But you know, had there not been this apocalyptic event bringing them together, like I can't see them working out, but I really could see it felt very genuine the way they came together, reacting to the events. That was what, for me, sold the relationship.
It feels like they got together as a trauma response, and then the and then the romantic feelings sort of developed later, which is a really real thing that happens.
Yeah, I mean, like that's totally valid.
Well, and one thing I knew going in is that if you've got a bunch of 20-somethings stuck in a single place for an extended period of time, you know, some hooking up is going to happen.
Oh my God, the DJ in the meeting room.
Yeah, I know, the DJs and the weird sexy raves and stuff like that. It's like, I had a lot of fun. I mean, I think that probably when I surprised myself, it was like, okay, they have raves, you know, why not? Or like all the weird stuff that they find in people's desks. Yeah, it was just fun to kind of imagine all the things that would happen in this kind of a situation. And I do kind of take away this, at least for a time, I take away the survivalist element. Like they've got enough food. Mm-hmm. So if you've got enough food, you got nowhere to go. What do? You party and you just kind of act like nothing has changed.
But the fun thing is the way that mimics the corporate structure, right? Because you have them, form committees and they have requisition forms. And I was like, I know this.
Oh, the party planning committee.
Yeah, I know this from working.
Did you catch? I put in the book, so there's a party planning committee, and I mentioned that like some people call them the party planning committee because of a TV show that they used to watch. That's The Office.
Yes.
Clear? Okay.
Yes.
Everybody knows that, I guess. Yeah.
I do. Whenever something like that happens in a book, I stop and think like, okay, was the writer trying to avoid like a copyright thing? But then you do use Starbucks. So was that just a joke? I was very curious.
It was a joke, I guess.
Okay.
I think I wanted people to be like, oh yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
Sort of that moment of recognition. Because I do mention Starbucks and like Chipotle and Panda Express and stuff. There's brands in there. One thing that I did not make it into the book, but I had it in an initial draft, is the raves. We've mentioned the raves. I mentioned in the interlude that the DJ ends every night with a song that they all know from when they were younger. Mm-hmm. And they all get onto the floor and sing. And it's Live While We're Young by One Direction. Well, my editor was like, you can't put song lyrics into this book. We're never going to get permission for it. But I just loved the idea that, in the middle of an apocalypse, they would sing Tonight Let's Get Some and Live While We're Young. It's sort of like, I don't know, it just feels different in that context.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. I don't know. I like the pop culture call outs when you're allowed to use them.
Well, it really cements it in the familiar world.
Yeah.
Like you said, that food court setting is like, I've been to that food court. That's every food court.
I think I wanted to talk about and not elevate necessarily, but I had a point in my life when I was starting to become a writer where I found a lot of the pieces of modern life kind of embarrassing and boring to write about. I was like, my life is just strip malls and suburban subdivisions and food courts. Like, who wants to hear about that? But with this book, I was like, I'm going to talk about Starbucks. I'm going to talk about Chipotle and just like the boring, banal stuff that fills our lives in 21st century capitalism.
That's the other one. Who here has been a barista? Yes. There we go. Yeah, everyone.
Yeah, 3 for 3.
It's not a universal experience. I don't want to, that's my
a lot of
small worldview showing, but yeah, a lot of people.
Food service, I think in general, is like a very common experience among a lot of folks.
Yeah. I did love how at the beginning it was the food service employees who were on top because they knew what the food situation was.
Yeah.
I really love that sort of flip because there is sort of that, maybe not tension, but they're both minimum wage jobs, but the office employee still looking down on the food service employee.
There's a hierarchy.
Yeah. And so having that flipped felt very gratifying. Just, not that I'm the food service champion, but the idea that they have real world useful survival skills.
And this is something that Jacob is anxious about. He knows a bunch of stuff from his English major and from college, but he realizes that it's not useful. The food service employees, they know how to prepare the food. That's really important, And a lot of the people who do the most important stuff in our world, teachers, people who make food, we just don't appreciate them enough. So that's definitely a real thing.
The rest of my notes are just my conspiracy theories that I came up with while reading the book.
I do actually have one last question, though.
You go, because that'll be better than my nonsense.
Yeah. And so that's this book telegraphs some things, right? Like, the ominous corporation that is Delphi, but you really keep us guessing on the particulars of what's going on right up until the reveal. And how much of that were you hoping that readers would pick up on before you told us? And how much of that were you expecting to be a surprise or wanting to be a surprise?
I wanted as much of it to be a surprise as I could. I knew that it would not be a surprise that the company was involved somehow, because you've got an event, you've got a secretive company. Like if the company wasn't involved, people would be like, what the heck? So I knew that, if there was going to be a surprise, it wasn't like, oh my goodness, the company's involved. That's not a reveal to anyone who knows how stories work.
Mm-hmm.
So the only real surprises could be, as you say, the particulars, like how is the company involved and what's going to happen when they uncover how it's involved and all that. I think something, and maybe I didn't do this deliberately, but something that maybe worked well in retrospect is that I did put clues in along the way, or I put in things that kind of seemed random along the way, or just like random part of the satire that turned out to be relevant. And like the major one is the app Concierge, which comes up very early and, initially just seems like a bit of tech capitalist satire, but it turns out to be really relevant to the mystery. And I'm not sure if that's surprising, but I hope it feels satisfying. Like, oh, that thing that was mentioned early on that was maybe just funny at the time, that turns out to be really significant. Or that weird thing about smart alloy. Like, that's not really super significant, but it's all, I don't know, I kind of wanted to get at those pieces sideways, introduce some of the pieces of the mystery kind of accidentally, just as you're working with the characters' backstories. So I'm glad that it's at least somewhat surprising to some readers. I know that probably won't be universal. Maybe there are people who kind of put it together beforehand, but I hope not. Surprise is always fun.
Well, I think Concierge is the perfect example because I knew the second it was introduced, like, okay, this is something sinister and awful. But I had no idea how.
Sure.
And so that was the reveal, was how exactly this fit into the bigger picture.
Or like, for example, the apocalyptic game that, and I forget her name, but she's
Morgan.
Yeah, Morgan, that she's playtesting. Like, yes, you get the sense that this fits into the bigger picture somehow, but you don't know how. And finding out how is very, very satisfying.
And mostly none of the characters really seem to, sometimes in books, characters will like find a piece of the puzzle and they'll be like, oh, a piece of the puzzle. In this book, for at least the first half or so, pieces of the puzzle are introduced, but none of the characters are paying attention to them. Maybe the reader is, but the character's just like, okay, that's weird. And then they just keep moving on. So I don't know, maybe that worked a little bit so that it's not too obvious how things, like calling attention to it, like this is significant. Maybe it's significant, or maybe it's not.
My big conspiracy theory was that Brent and Brant were the same person.
Yeah.
During the PowerPoint presentation, I was like, wait, wasn't that the CEO's name?
Guy.
Wait, hold on.
The same guy. I think I may have made a mistake by like making their names too similar, honestly. But in hindsight,
I thought you were telling me a secret.
Well, Brent is sort of he proclaims himself to be the CEO in some ways. So, maybe it ends up being a thematic echo or something like that, where he's like, I'm just gonna claim authority, even though nobody gave it to me. I'm gonna be the CEO of this survivors group.
I mean, I was just reaching. With a book like this, when there are going to be reveals,
sure,
how can you not try to solve the mystery, right? Brant is obviously a mysterious character, so trying to, read into everything to figure out what is actually going on and what are the clues and what's just coincidence. But I thought it might be like an undercover boss situation.
I guess I do need some red herrings, so it's not a bad thing to accidentally put some in.
I didn't think Brant was going to be Brent, but I did think that he was going to be the IT guy or Casey.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
When Casey shows up, I was like, wait, so it was actually him.
Yeah.
But that was just in my head now. My other conspiracy was the moment that Brant sort of drops his persona and starts apologizing to Jane. I thought, was Jane behind it all and putting Brant up to this?
Jane's the CEO. Jane's the real CEO.
What if? Her actual story is much, much better.
I'm glad she's not evil. I like
yeah.
Jane. I like Jane. Poor
But
Jane.
I thought, wow, what a twist. No, she really is a put upon employee who has dealt with way more bullshit than she should have to.
So put upon. Yeah. Very, yeah. It sucks what happens to her. She's great though. I mean, I love Jane. So if maybe that's incentive for me to write a sequel so that we can get a real like happy ending for her and some real, revenge maybe.
I would read that.
Yeah. The assistant's revenge. I mean, the assistants of the world need to rise up.
Yes.
Maybe Brant becomes her assistant.
Yes.
And she gets to boss him around.
I like that. You're just giving me ideas for the sequel. This is all good.
Good. You better go write it because I want to read it. Were there any topics that you wanted to cover that we haven't gotten into?
I don't think so. Just now that you're mentioning Brant and like, who is he? I have this kind of dream that maybe someday this will be made into a movie. And like a lot of different people can play different Brants, and it'll be like, who's going to play the real Brant? Like there'll be kind of like a casting, like a trick casting thing where when the actor is revealed at the end, it's like, oh, that guy. I don't know. That's just like authors have their dreams, and that's one of mine.
I love that though. I would love to see like a star-studded cast of Brants, different Brants.
Yeah. And a bunch of them are just walk-on cameos and stuff like that. So
there are those actors that are known for looking like each other, right? That'd be fun. That'd be really fun.
Now I'm thinking about who they might be. I just have to, I don't know. Now I'm casting in my head. But
I just know that Spider-Man gets mistaken for a bunch of different people.
Andrew Garfield?
Or
no, the first one.
The first
Tobey
one.
Maguire.
Yeah, Tobey Maguire gets mistaken. Let's see. Harry Potter and Frodo Baggins apparently get mistaken for each other, although I don't see it.
That is strange.
Yeah, right? We didn't warn you, but we occasionally do segment either Words Are Weird, where we talk about weird words, or pet peeves, stuff that bothers us in writing. I didn't have anything prepared. Normally we wouldn't just throw this at you, but if you have one off the top of your head, we could talk about it.
Words are weird, or pet peeves.
Yeah.
I think that sometimes writers will spend too much time making people like grin or blink or like little indications, little indicators. Sometimes we just don't need that. And maybe I do that sometimes. I try to kind of pull back on that stuff, but like little small things like, man, this guy grins a lot, or this person frowns a lot, or, just like a lot of over indication of facial stuff. And sometimes I just prefer to read the dialogue and kind of just know what the facial expressions are probably like. I don't know. That's like a maybe petty pet peeve, but
it's a pet peeve. That's the definition of pet peeve.
Pet peeves are petty.
All of our pet peeves are petty. Yes.
I'm only petty.
Do you think that's a result of people taking show don't tell too far?
Sure.
Yeah, that's what it feels like to me. It's like they grinned. You can just say they liked it. That's okay. I agree. And especially like writers, you can tell they have that one that's like their favorite.
Yeah.
Smirking.
You can always tell. I mean, I haven't read my book in a while. So I could probably turn to a page and be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I use that word all the time.
That's okay. I won't tell anybody.
Okay, thank you.
It's just between us. It's a secret.
This is a safe place.
Yes.
A safe place.
Do you have any current projects that you can talk to us a little bit about?
Yeah. So I'm working right now on a sort of new and somewhat dystopian idea about sort of a government agent who is sent as like a spy in a region of the country that has recently declared its independence from the broader nation. And it's sort of like my engagement with my own fears and concerns about what might be happening to democracy in America. And like, oh my goodness, I guess I just think about like all the terrible things that could happen. Like, oh my goodness, are we gonna have a civil war? Are we gonna break up into smaller nations? Like,
To be fair, it's easy to think that.
I know it
recent
kind of seems
times.
like it's gonna happen, and like maybe I'm writing too slowly, and the world is going to catch up with me, you know. But that's what I've been working on and thinking through. I'm still in that phase where I'm like, is this anything? You know, am I going to be able to give this idea justice? So I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to see it all the way to the end, but I'm at least committed to giving the idea a fair shake.
Well, I'm always a proponent of throwing some zombies in the mix, so consider that.
Yeah, maybe it can be like, maybe it can be in the same universe as the Temps, and you know, like,
Ooh.
yeah.
I mean, that would make sense.
Extended universe.
Yeah.
Extended universe. Yeah.
That's what we're all about now.
You don't necessarily need zombies, but it's a fascinating idea regardless.
All right. Well, I'll keep plugging away at it then. So then I might have something.
And so before we let you go, because it is getting late, so thank you for staying on the call with us.
I don't know.
Can you tell us where you can be found on the internet?
Yeah, so folks can find me on Twitter. My handle is at Andrew J. DeYoung, middle initial, because someone else has parked on Andrew DeYoung.
Rude.
Yeah, it happens. You can also find me at andrewdeyoung.com. That is my website. I'm also, you know, at Instagram and Facebook with the same handles, but I do most of my social media posting on Twitter.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure talking to you today.
Yeah, this was wonderful.
This was a ton of fun, and this is the first spoilery discussion that I've been able to have. So it's great to be able to talk at this level.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I mean, how can you talk about the book and not talk about those things we said that we're no longer talking about?
It's been really hard. It's been really hard, but you let me let loose. So I really appreciate it. And you've been so generous. So really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for joining us. This has been just absolutely a delight.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fiction Fans.
Come disagree with us. We're on Twitter and Instagram at FictionFansPod. You can also email us at fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
If you enjoyed the episode, please rate and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And follow us wherever your podcasts live.
Thanks again for listening, and may your villains always be defeated. Bye.
Bye.